Charles had always believed that love could conquer anything. After years of waiting, fighting public opinion, and overcoming countless obstacles, he finally married the woman he had loved for decades. Camilla was his anchor, his confidant, and the person who understood him better than anyone else in the world. Their relationship had weathered storms that would have destroyed most couples, and Charles felt grateful every day for their second chance at happiness. The morning started like any other at their countryside estate. Charles woke early, as was his habit, and found Camilla already gone from their bed. He assumed she was in the garden, tending to her beloved roses, or perhaps having her morning tea in the conservatory. The house felt peaceful, filled with the soft light of dawn filtering through the ancient windows. Charles made his way to his study, intending to review some documents before breakfast. As he passed Camilla's private sitting room, he noticed the door was slightly ajar. This was unusual because Camilla was very particular about her privacy, especially when it came to her personal correspondence and phone calls. Something about the slightly open door made him pause. He could hear Camilla's voice from within, speaking in hushed tones. Charles wasn't the type to eavesdrop, but something in her tone made him stop. There was an urgency, almost a desperation, that he had never heard before. His heart began to race as he strained to hear her words. "You have to understand," Camilla was saying. "This has gone on long enough. Charles doesn't know anything about the real reason I married him, and it needs to stay that way." Charles felt as though the ground had shifted beneath his feet. He pressed himself against the wall, his mind racing to make sense of what he had just heard. The real reason she married him? What could that possibly mean? They had married for love, hadn't they? After all those years of separation, all the pain they had endured being apart, surely their love was genuine. "The plan is working perfectly," Camilla continued. "He trusts me completely. He shares everything with me, every decision, every concern about the monarchy, every private family matter. My contacts are very pleased with the information I've been able to provide." Charles felt his legs grow weak. Information? What information? And who were these contacts Camilla was referring to? He had never heard her mention any mysterious contacts before. His mind began to spin with possibilities, each one more troubling than the last. No, you don't understand." Camilla's voice became more agitated. "Charles isn't just my husband. He's going to be king. The access I have to royal family secrets, to state matters, to private conversations with government officials, it's invaluable. That's why I had to marry him. That's why I endured all those years of public hatred and criticism. It was all worth it for this moment." The words hit Charles like physical blows. Each sentence felt like a knife twisting in his heart. The woman he had loved for most of his adult life, the woman he had defended against public criticism, the woman he had chosen over duty and convention, she had been using him all along. "Yes, I know about the children," Camilla said, and Charles realized she must be talking about his sons, William and Harry. "I've been carefully documenting their personal struggles, their relationships, their private conversations. Everything goes into the reports." Charles had to grip the doorframe to keep from falling. His own children? Camilla had been spying on his children? He thought about all the time she had been present during family gatherings, all the private moments she had witnessed, all the confidences that had been shared in her presence. Had she been making mental notes the entire time? "The divorce papers are already prepared," Camilla continued, and Charles felt his world completely collapse. "Once I have everything I need, once the real secrets come to light, I'll leave him. By then, the damage will be done, and our clients will have enough information to cause a scandal that could bring down the entire royal family." Charles couldn't breathe. The air seemed to have been sucked out of the hallway. Divorce papers? Scandal? Bringing down the royal family? This wasn't just personal betrayal. This was treason. The woman he loved, the woman he had trusted with his deepest secrets, his fears, his hopes for the future of the monarchy, she was planning to destroy everything he held dear. "Charles has been so easy to manipulate," Camilla laughed, and the sound was like glass breaking in Charles's ears. "He thinks I love him. He thinks our marriage is this great romantic story, the prince who waited decades for his true love. If only he knew the truth. If only he knew that every kiss, every tender moment, every declaration of love has been carefully calculated." The hallway began to spin around Charles. He felt nauseated, betrayed beyond anything he had ever experienced. This was worse than any political scandal, worse than any public humiliation he had ever endured. This was the complete destruction of everything he believed about love, about trust, about the woman who shared his bed every night. "I need more time," Camilla was saying. There are still some family secrets I haven't uncovered. Something about Queen Elizabeth's private will, some information about Charles's health that could be useful. Give me another few months, and I'll have everything we need to expose them all. Charles realized he was shaking. His mother's private will? His own health information? How long had Camilla been planning this betrayal? How long had she been living this elaborate lie? He tried to remember signs he might have missed, moments when her affection seemed forced or calculated, but his mind was too overwhelmed to think clearly. The phone call seemed to be ending. Charles heard movement from within the room and realized he needed to get away before Camilla discovered him. On unsteady legs, he made his way back to his study, closing the door quietly behind him. He slumped into his chair, his head in his hands, trying to process what he had just learned. Everything about their relationship felt tainted now. Their wedding day, their quiet moments together, the way she had supported him through difficult times. Had any of it been real? Charles thought about how he had defended her to his sons, how he had insisted that she genuinely cared for their family, how he had trusted her with his most private thoughts and fears. The worst part was realizing how completely he had been fooled. Camilla was a skilled actress, and he had been the unwitting star of her performance. Every morning when she kissed him goodbye, every evening when she asked about his day, every time she offered comfort or advice, she had been gathering intelligence for her mysterious contacts. Charles sat in his study for what felt like hours, staring out the window at the grounds he loved so much. This estate, this life they had built together, it was all built on lies. He felt like a fool, like a naive romantic who had been taken advantage of by someone far more cunning and calculating than he had ever imagined. The sound of Camilla's footsteps in the hallway made Charles's heart race with anxiety. How would he face her now? How could he look into her eyes, knowing what he knew, and pretend that nothing had changed? But he realized he had to be careful. If Camilla was involved in some kind of espionage operation, if she was working with contacts who wanted to bring down the royal family, then confronting her directly might be dangerous. When Camilla entered the study with his morning tea, Charles forced himself to look up and smile. "Good morning, darling," she said, exactly as she had said every morning for years. But now Charles could see the performance in it. The smile seemed calculated, the endearment hollow. "Good morning," Charles managed to reply, his voice sounding strange to his own ears. Camilla seemed not to notice anything unusual. She kissed his forehead and commented on the beautiful morning, just as she always did. But now Charles wondered if she was already thinking about what information she could gather from him today, what secrets she could add to her reports. As Camilla left the study, Charles realized that his life had fundamentally changed in the space of a single overheard conversation. The woman he thought he knew, the marriage he thought was built on decades of genuine love, the future he had imagined they would share together, none of it was real. He was living with a stranger, sleeping next to someone who was systematically betraying him and his entire family. Charles knew he had to be smart about his next steps. He couldn't let Camilla know that he had discovered her secret, at least not yet. He needed time to think, to plan, to figure out exactly what she was involved in and who she was working with. Most importantly, he needed to protect his family and the monarchy from whatever damage she was planning to inflict. The man who had started the day feeling grateful for his second chance at love now found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about trust, loyalty, and the woman who had shared his life for so many years. Charles realized that the real challenge wasn't just dealing with Camilla's betrayal. It was figuring out how to protect everything he held dear while his heart was breaking into pieces. The following weeks became a torturous exercise in pretending for Charles. Every interaction with Camilla felt like walking through a minefield. He found himself analyzing every word she spoke, every gesture she made, looking for clues about her true intentions. The woman who had once been his comfort and refuge had become a source of constant anxiety and pain. Charles decided he needed to investigate further before making any decisions. He couldn't confront Camilla without understanding the full extent of her deception and the identity of her mysterious contacts. Late at night, when Camilla was asleep, he began searching through her personal belongings, feeling like an intruder in his own home. What he discovered was worse than he had imagined. Hidden in a secret compartment of Camilla's antique desk, Charles found a collection of documents that made his blood run cold. There were detailed reports about private family conversations, copies of confidential government documents that had crossed his desk, photographs of personal family moments, and even medical information about various royal family members. The reports were meticulously organized and professionally written, suggesting that Camilla had been trained for this kind of work. Charles found records of payments made to offshore accounts, communication logs with coded messages, and, most shocking of all, a contract outlining her assignment to marry him and gather intelligence on the royal family for a period of 5 years. Reading the contract, Charles learned that Camilla's handlers had identified him as a vulnerable target years earlier, during his divorce from Diana. They had capitalized on his emotional state and his long-standing affection for Camilla to position her perfectly for the ultimate infiltration of the royal family. The plan had been in motion for over a decade. The documents revealed that Camilla's organization had been selling royal family secrets to tabloid newspapers, foreign governments, and private individuals who collected sensitive information about public figures. Charles realized that many of the embarrassing stories that had appeared in the press over the years, stories that had caused his family tremendous pain and embarrassment, had likely originated from Camilla's reports. One particularly devastating document was a detailed psychological profile of Charles himself, written in Camilla's handwriting. She had analyzed his personality, his weaknesses, his fears, and his deepest insecurities. The report described him as emotionally dependent, easily manipulated through displays of affection, and completely trusting once his loyalty is secured. Reading about himself through Camilla's clinical, calculating eyes was perhaps more painful than learning about the betrayal itself. Charles discovered that Camilla had been particularly focused on gathering information about the line of succession, the Queen's private wealth, and any potential scandals involving his sons. There were detailed notes about William's marriage, Harry's struggles, and even observations about his grandchildren. Nothing was too private or too sacred for Camilla's reports. The most chilling discovery was a document outlining Camilla's exit strategy. According to the plan, she would initiate divorce proceedings at a carefully calculated moment when the revelation of her true purpose would cause maximum damage to the royal family's reputation. The timing was designed to coincide with several other planned exposures that would create a media storm capable of seriously undermining the monarchy's stability. Charles realized that he had been living with someone who viewed him not as a husband, but as a target. Every tender moment they had shared, every vulnerable conversation, every time he had sought her comfort during difficult periods, Camilla had been coldly documenting it all for her handlers. The intimacy he had treasured was nothing more than a professional relationship for her. The emotional impact of these discoveries was overwhelming. Charles found himself unable to eat or sleep properly. He would stare at Camilla across the dinner table, marveling at her ability to maintain her performance. She continued to play the role of the devoted wife, asking about his day, offering opinions on royal matters, expressing concern for his well-being. Her acting skills were so refined that Charles began to doubt his own memory of what he had overheard. During this period, Charles also began to notice things about Camilla's behavior that he had previously overlooked. Her phone calls that she always took in private, her occasional unexplained absences, her detailed questions about his official duties, and her subtle way of steering conversations towards sensitive topics. Looking back, Charles realized the signs had always been there, but his love and trust had blinded him to them. The strain of maintaining his facade began to affect Charles's public duties. His staff noticed that he seemed distracted and less engaged than usual. During official events, Charles found himself wondering if Camilla was mentally cataloging everything she witnessed for her next report. State dinners, private meetings with government officials, family celebrations, every event had become a potential intelligence-gathering opportunity in Charles's mind. One evening, Charles decided to test his suspicions. During dinner, he casually mentioned a fictional piece of information about a supposed upcoming change in royal protocol. He watched carefully as Camilla asked follow-up questions, expressing just the right amount of interest without seeming too eager. 2 days later, Charles discovered that the false information had somehow found its way to a journalist who contacted the palace asking for confirmation. This confirmed Charles's worst fears. Not only was Camilla spying on him, but she was actively and immediately passing along information to her contacts. The woman sharing his bed was essentially a live-in intelligence operative, and Charles had been providing her with a constant stream of classified and personal information without even realizing it. Charles began to understand the full scope of the betrayal. This wasn't just about his personal heartbreak. It was about national security, family safety, and the stability of the institution he would one day lead. Camilla's activities could potentially compromise ongoing government operations, endanger royal family members, and undermine public trust in the monarchy. The psychological toll of living with this knowledge became almost unbearable. Charles found himself jumping at unexpected sounds, constantly worrying about what information he might accidentally reveal, and feeling paranoid about every conversation. The home that had once been his sanctuary now felt like enemy territory. During this dark period, Charles began to replay their entire relationship in his mind, searching for signs of deception he had missed. He remembered times when Camilla had encouraged him to share more details about family matters, occasions when she had seemed particularly interested in his private conversations with his mother or his children, and moments when she had asked seemingly innocent questions about government business. Charles also began to worry about what other information Camilla might have access to. Did she have copies of his personal correspondence? Had she photographed important documents? Were there recording devices hidden in their private spaces? The paranoia was eating away at him, but he knew he couldn't let Camilla suspect that he had discovered her true purpose. The most painful realization was understanding that his decades-long love for Camilla had been weaponized against him. His genuine feelings had been studied, analyzed, and exploited by people who viewed his emotions as nothing more than tools to be manipulated. The love story he had believed in, the relationship he had fought to protect and defend, had been a carefully orchestrated deception from the beginning. Charles knew he was approaching a breaking point. He couldn't continue living this lie much longer without either confronting Camilla directly or suffering a complete emotional breakdown. But he also understood that he needed to be strategic about his next moves. If he handled this situation poorly, the damage to his family and the monarchy could be irreversible. Late one night, as Charles lay awake next to the woman who had betrayed him so completely, he made a decision. He couldn't continue living in this state of constant deception and anxiety. He needed to take action, not just to protect himself, but to protect his family and the institution he had sworn to serve. The next phase of this nightmare was about to begin, and Charles knew that whatever he decided to do would change everything forever. The man who had once believed that love could conquer any obstacle now understood that sometimes love itself could be the weapon used to destroy you. Charles closed his eyes, knowing that when he opened them again, he would begin the most difficult and painful chapter of his life. Charles knew he couldn't handle this crisis alone. After days of internal torment, he made the difficult decision to reach out to his most trusted security advisor, Sir Michael Crawford, a man who had served the royal family for over 30 years. The meeting was arranged under the pretense of routine security briefing, held at a private location away from the palace. When Charles revealed what he had discovered, Sir Michael's face grew increasingly grave. The veteran security expert immediately understood the implications of what Charles was describing. This wasn't just marital infidelity or personal betrayal. This was a sophisticated intelligence operation that had successfully penetrated the highest levels of the British establishment. Your Majesty, Sir Michael said carefully, what you're describing suggests a long-term intelligence operation, possibly foreign-sponsored. We need to move very carefully here. If we handle this wrong, the security implications could be catastrophic. Sir Michael explained that they needed to identify all of Camilla's contacts, understand the full extent of the information that had been compromised, and determine who was behind the operation before taking any action. Confronting Camilla directly could cause her handlers to activate contingency plans that might release damaging information immediately. Together, they developed a careful strategy. Charles would continue his normal routine while a discreet investigation was conducted. Special surveillance would be placed on Camilla without her knowledge, her communications would be monitored, and her background would be thoroughly re-examined for any details that had been missed during the original security clearance process. The investigation that followed revealed the true scope of the operation. Camilla's handlers were part of an international organization that specialized in long-term intelligence operations against high-value targets. They had been planning Charles's infiltration since his divorce from Diana, carefully positioning Camilla to exploit his emotional vulnerability and his nostalgic feelings about their past relationship. The organization had invested significant resources in this operation, providing Camilla with extensive training in psychology, manipulation techniques, and intelligence gathering. They had created an elaborate false identity for her that would withstand most background checks, and they had been patient enough to wait years for the perfect opportunity to activate their plan. Charles learned that several other royal families across Europe had been targeted by similar operations, with varying degrees of success. The modern world's appetite for celebrity gossip and royal scandals had created a lucrative market for insider information, and criminal organizations had adapted their methods accordingly. During the investigation, Charles had to continue living with Camilla, pretending that nothing had changed. This became increasingly difficult as he learned more about the extent of her deception. Every conversation felt surreal, knowing that the woman expressing concern for his well-being was simultaneously plotting his destruction. The surveillance revealed that Camilla was in regular contact with at least 3 different handlers, using sophisticated communication methods to avoid detection. She had been photographing documents with a concealed camera, recording conversations with hidden devices, and even accessing Charles's personal computer and phone when he wasn't present. One of the most disturbing discoveries was that Camilla had been drugging Charles with mild sedatives on occasions when she needed to access his private spaces or when she wanted to ensure he slept deeply while she conducted her activities. The medication was subtle enough that Charles had attributed his occasional drowsiness to stress or overwork. The investigation also revealed that Camilla's organization was planning to release a massive collection of royal family secrets in a coordinated media campaign designed to cause maximum damage to the monarchy's reputation. They had been waiting for Charles to become king, believing that the scandal would be more devastating if it emerged after his coronation. Sir Michael informed Charles that they had identified several journalists and media outlets that were part of the conspiracy, ready to publish the stolen information on command. The operation was far more sophisticated and dangerous than Charles had initially realized. As the investigation progressed, Charles struggled with intense emotional pain and a growing sense of isolation. He couldn't confide in his children about what was happening, as their safety might be compromised if Camilla suspected they knew about her activities. He felt completely alone in dealing with the greatest betrayal of his life. The final phase of the investigation involved setting a trap for Camilla's handlers. Sir Michael's team created false information about a supposed upcoming royal announcement that would be of significant interest to Camilla's organization. They carefully fed this information to Charles, knowing he would naturally share it with his wife. Within hours of Charles mentioning the false information to Camilla, the surveillance team observed her transmitting the details to her contacts. This confirmed not only that she was actively spying on Charles, but also that she was in immediate communication with her handlers. Armed with enough evidence to prove Camilla's guilt and identify her network of contacts, Sir Michael presented Charles with several options for how to proceed. They could arrest Camilla and her known associates, which would be satisfying but might result in the immediate release of already gathered information as a contingency measure. Alternatively, they could continue the surveillance while feeding Camilla false information, essentially turning her into an unwitting double agent. Charles chose a third option. He decided to confront Camilla directly, but only after her handlers and known associates had been arrested simultaneously in a coordinated operation. This would prevent them from activating any contingency plans while ensuring that Camilla understood the full extent of what had been discovered. The confrontation took place on a quiet Sunday morning at their countryside estate. Charles had spent the night reviewing all the evidence one final time, preparing himself for what he knew would be one of the most difficult conversations of his life. When Camilla entered the breakfast room, she found Charles sitting at the table with a collection of documents spread before him. Copies of her reports, photographs of her hidden communication devices, and transcripts of her conversations with her handlers. For a moment, Camilla maintained her facade, smiling and asking about his plans for the day. But, as she noticed the documents, her expression slowly changed. The mask finally slipped, and, for the first time since Charles had known her, he saw Camilla's true face, cold, calculating, and completely devoid of the warmth he had believed was genuine. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice now clinical and professional, stripped of all the affection she had performed for so many years. "Long enough," Charles replied, surprised by how calm his own voice sounded. "Long enough to understand that everything about our relationship has been a lie." Camilla made no attempt to deny the accusations or express remorse. Instead, she seemed almost relieved that the performance was finally over. She explained, with chilling detachment, that she had been recruited specifically for this operation and that she had never felt any genuine affection for Charles or his family. "You were remarkably easy to manipulate," she said, her words cutting through Charles like knives. "Your need for emotional validation made you completely blind to what was happening right in front of you." Charles listened as Camilla described how she had studied his psychological profile, how she had been trained to exploit his vulnerabilities, and how every tender moment they had shared had been calculated to maintain his trust and keep him emotionally dependent on her. The conversation lasted for over an hour, during which Charles learned details about the operation that the investigation had missed. Camilla seemed eager to explain her work, perhaps proud of how successfully she had deceived him for so long. By the end of their conversation, Charles felt a strange sense of relief mixed with profound sadness. The emotional torture of living with uncertainty was over, but the reality of what he had lost was overwhelming. The relationship he had treasured, the love he had fought to protect, the future he had envisioned, none of it had ever been real. As security personnel arrived to escort Camilla away, she showed no emotion whatsoever. There were no tears, no apologies, no acknowledgement of the human cost of her actions. She simply gathered her personal belongings and walked out of Charles's life with the same cold professionalism she had brought to every aspect of their relationship. In the weeks that followed, Charles had to deal with the practical and emotional aftermath of the betrayal. The media was told that he and Camilla had separated due to irreconcilable differences, with no mention of the true circumstances. The investigation had recovered most of the stolen information before it could be released, preventing the media scandal that Camilla's organization had planned. Charles found himself having to rebuild his ability to trust others, while also dealing with the grief of losing what he had believed was the great love of his life. He realized that he would need professional help to process the psychological trauma of having been so thoroughly deceived by someone he had trusted completely. The experience changed Charles fundamentally. He became more cautious in his personal relationships, more aware of the potential for deception, and more protective of sensitive information. The naive romantic who had believed in the power of true love had been replaced by someone who understood that trust, once broken so completely, might never be fully restored. As Charles stood in his study months later, looking out at the same garden where he had once imagined growing old with Camilla, he reflected on the hard lesson he had learned. Love, he now understood, could be both the most beautiful and the most dangerous force in human experience. It could inspire great joy and profound sacrifice, but it could also be weaponized by those who understood how to exploit its power. The man who had once believed that finding true love was the answer to all his problems now understood that sometimes the greatest strength comes from learning to stand alone, to trust carefully, and to value truth above the comfortable illusions that we sometimes mistake for love.